What we need up front to get going with the escrow. So we're going to go over what ideally you could send at the beginning of opening an escrow, whether it's a pre-open or an escrow where you have an offer. We'll go over the critical items that we would, perfect world, like to have at the beginning. Go over the earnest money deposit. We'll also go over what gets sent to your clients, the digital opening package that gets sent to your buyers and sellers. We'll go over that and what that entails and what that possibly could be, what looks like for your clients. And then we'll also go over HOAs, the requirements and the timing, and what needs to be done, and how it's a good idea to start that process early on, even if it's a pre-open. And then the 3 big things to look for on your prelim. There's actually a few more things that I'll mention other than the 3 big things that you should pay attention to on your prelims. And then other red flags that possibly can come up within your escrow. Hopefully you have pre-opened your escrow and those red flags have been dealt with already. And then the escrow flow. Again, start to finish, what that looks like, what you can do to be proactive instead of reactive. But, you know, that's in a perfect world. We're all human and we do react. What your client signing looks like and top tips for a smooth closing. And as I said earlier, Q&A to answer all your questions. Again, put those questions in the chat. So here we go. We're going to get started. Opening escrow is an exciting time, a great feeling, but there's a lot of work involved to get to those magic words that we are on record, and even more work after we're on record. A lot of people get excited once we're on record and once thinks that we're done, that it's over, but there's lots of post-closing things that have to happen as well on our end, and we're here to shine a little bit of light on that for you guys so you understand what's happening behind the curtain. Customarily, the seller's agent, the listing agent, will open the escrow. In some areas, it is the buyer's agent. However, in this area in Central California, it's typically the listing agent that opens escrow. Now, no one's to say that you as a buyer's agent can request a certain type title company, like write us into the offer, whatever the case may be. There may be scenarios why it's best that we handle the escrow because of previous transactions, or where we've handled your clients' transactions in the past, and we have their information on file to help make the process go a little bit more smoother. What we will need is a fully executed purchase contract, all addendums, and commission breakdown. That commission breakdown is super important these days. Just with the variation of commissions these days, we don't, like Stephanie Dimmick said yesterday on social media, we don't have a crystal ball. We just cannot sit here and just assume it's 6%, 3 and 3, or 5%, 2.5, 2.5. Emotions start getting involved, and when we are given information, maybe incorrect information, we will never, ever, ever assume a commission breakdown, but just out the gate, give it to us so there's no questions, there's no hurt feelings, there's no, everybody knows what, who's on first and what's happening on second. So contact information for the buyers and sellers, lender and payoff lender, super important. I do have a little side note. If you are representing a buyer and they are still shopping, even after they've submitted an offer, it's best to have your buyer actually decide on who they're actually going to be using for their lender before you get to this point. Because what we are seeing right now, especially with the volatile rates and, everybody getting into contract and not knowing what the rate's going to look like next week, we are getting 3 to 4 lender requests on each transaction sometimes. And it's not, and I'm not saying that we are not here for you, but it's a process to put all of that in lender information, let title know, and then they have to redo the prelim to make sure that the lender's going to be so it could delay, is what I'm saying. It could delay your process. I know it doesn't seem realistic that we would get all the, but you got to understand these lenders are battling for the deal. And so they're trying to get their package in, they're trying to get their loan approved. And part of that approval process is some of our documentation, some of our paperwork. So it's best that you have your buyer decide on who they're going to go with before you get to this point. Now, it's not a dead deal. It's not it's not a done deal. If they're still shopping, just let us know. Just let us know, because we don't want to send out incorrect information, also. So HOA and solar info, we do need this information as soon as possible. What happens with the HOA is there is a time frame that they give us an ETA that we won't have their documents for up to 10 days. Sometimes there's a fee for that process, and that 10 days does not start until the seller pays for that fee. So the earlier we have that HOA information, the earlier we can get that package ordered and get that time started. Solar information. If there is a solar company, just let us know. We're going to find out anyway on the prelim who the solar company is. You want to take note, and if you're going to take any notes on solar, you're going to take this note right. The solar companies out there, we reach out to every single one of them and say, hey, we're the escrow and title company for this property. We are in a transaction. Please send us the releases for the current owner so we can record it at the close of escrow. If the solar company, if your client tells you, or the listing agent tells you as the buyer's agent that the solar company is Tesla, please know that they will not send us anything. They won't even talk to us. Unfortunately, with Tesla, they don't send us anything that we need until the very end, until the buyer and the seller has done something or has completed their process. So if the solar company is Tesla, as much as we would love to help you facilitate that process, there's nothing we can do. Unfortunately, that process lies heavily on the buyers and sellers. And then once they do what they do, then we will get an email from Tesla saying, hey, here is the UCC termination. Please provide us a FedEx label to send the notice, the release for notice for the solar on the property, and then of course they'll FedEx that. And then at that point, then we have what we need to be able to close, to be able to remove the solar in the seller's name. And then once we close, then Tesla will go ahead and file a new notice and a new UCC. They do that on their own. Okay, they do not send those new notices and the new UCCs to us. They do that on their own. Most of, actually all solar companies do refile for the new individual, for the new homeowner. We are just responsible for the termination and the notice release. Okay. So other Sunrun, Vivid, they all kind of been bought out, from one company to the other. They're really good at, keeping us in the loop as things progress. I do get emails from certain solar companies saying, hey, can you help us out? The buyer hasn't finished their credit check. We're unable to send you what you're requesting until this process is over. For whatever reason, Tesla just kind of keeps us out of the loop until the very end. Any special circumstances surrounding the escrow, clients out of the area, POAs, divorcing parties, etc. You have to know if they're on vacation or they're in another country. This is not something that we can just sign a POA and they, the person can sign for them. That POA still has to get notarized. And the only way you can have it notarized is through a U.S. embassy or U.S. consulate in another country. And that could take some time. So if this is the situation, let us know early on so we can start working on these type of scenarios and situations. So when we don't have a delay in closing, okay? A divorce, if your clients are separated, they are not divorced. They are divorced when the divorce is final and that divorce decree has been signed, issued, and filed. So if you are representing a buyer that's recently separated, you have to be aware that their soon-to-be ex-spouse will have to sign off on the transaction. Okay. And then escrow preferences, communication. If you want to be present at your client signing, whether you're representing the buyer or the seller, etc., let us know that ahead of time, because we have ways to note our file, even to the point where if somebody else is working our file and you give us that information, like, hey, the listing agent really wants to be CC'd on any communication with the seller, or hey, the buyer's agent really wants to be at their client signing. We have a way to enter those notes in our file to where if anybody in our company goes into that file, that note will pop up. So the more information, any kind of special request that you would like to have, give that to us and we will note the file. And if I'm out on vacation or I'm sick or something, somebody jumping in for me, we'll have that information. Okay.
So Anna, before we move on, and I know this may take longer to address, but just want to let you know, if the solar company is out of business and the solar is paid off and the solar doesn't have any documents or anything, what would their agent do? Is there any other way that that's been handled in what you've seen in your files?
So even if the solar company has gone out of business, that service has been transferred to somebody. Like if it's an inactive solar, that's just a dead solar system on the roof. But if they are still using solar energy, there is still a service. So the company that's out of business, their service has been transferred to somebody. So there's, like I said, the only time that if it's a dead system, it's just a dead system. But if they're using solar energy, there is somebody that has that servicing agreement. There might not be a solar lien on the property, but as long as there's solar being used, there is a servicing agreement. And so that seller has to provide the agents to provide to the buyer who their servicing agent is. Does that make sense? Getting the earnest money to escrow. If your escrow is cash and it's fast, or if it's hard money and it's fast, I suggest that a personal check is not ideal. If it's a slam dunk type of transaction that you've pre-opened, we've got the prelim, everything's clean and good, and then you get a cash offer, it's not recommended that we get a personal check because we have to wait 10 business days for that personal check to clear our accounting and our trust account. So if you do have a quick transaction, I suggest that earnest money deposit comes in as a cashier's check or a wire. So other than that, if it's a normal 30-day escrow, we are happy to accept a personal check and we can process it accordingly. And like I said just a few seconds ago, the cashier's check is another way that we can accept an earnest money deposit. And also via wire, the E&D can be submitted via wire. And then we do have our portal, our Start in Here portal, where it accepts mobile deposits through that portal. And it's basically they take a picture, they fill the check out, they complete it as if they were going to hand it to us. And they take a picture of it and submit it through that portal. And we have a way of accepting it as like if they had walked in the check, and we would process it accordingly. If that check is not completed entirely, we will have to reject it. We have had times where people thought that they just have to take an image of a voided check because of the account number and the routing number in the bottom, that we're able to just pull the funds from their account. That's not a scenario. That's not a situation. Like, they have to write it as if they're going to provide it to us or walk it into us. And as far as wiring their earnest money deposit, please, as an agent, I mean, I'm sure your brokers are going to agree, please do not ask the the escrow company to email you the wiring instructions for you to forward to your buyers. It's not a good idea. It's not a good practice. It's just a recipe for disaster. The reason being is we deliver those wiring instructions via secure email. If we were to send them to, we're happy to CC you on the email to your client. By all means, we're happy to CC you so you know that they got it. But should you ask us to send it to you and then you turn around and forward that email, our secure link is broken. And anybody can intercept your email to your buyer or your client and change those wiring instructions, and then bam, $12,500 deposit, earnest money deposit, did not get to the escrow company and is now in some other country. So do not ask the title and escrow company to email you the wire instructions for you to forward them to your clients. Okay. The digital opening package that we send out to the buyers and sellers at the beginning of each escrow is a portal, an information collecting portal. It's secure. It allows us to get that information from your clients securely, so where they feel like they don't have to sit and fill something out manually, like, you know, pen and paper and bring it in or email it in or fax it in, and even an email is not secure. You know, this is a very simple, we send an email out with the link, they click on the link and they go through and print out, or I'm sorry, and fill out all of the information that we request. Now it goes through asking, as far as sellers are concerned, do you have any mortgages on the property? Do you have solar on the property? Do you have an HOA? Have you done any improvements that you think that, you know, whatever the case may, it goes on through. If they're going to do a 1031 exchange, who is involved in the transaction as far as parties are concerned, you know, and then for the buyers, who is your lender? Who's going to be on title with you, their information, and so on and so forth. So it's very important that your clients are aware at the, you know, when you're talking to them and we're going to open up escrow, you're going to be receiving this digital opening package from the escrow company, and encourage them to complete it as soon as possible, because that's only the information that they're giving us is only going to help our escrow process run as smoothly as possible, for the seller, get those HOAs ordered, get the payoffs ordered, address solar. And for the buyers, a lot of the times the lender requests that we receive want to know how they're going to take title, how those names are going to read on title. So we're able to give the lenders what they need to start their underwriting process so they can get their clear to close. So that is what our Starting Here digital opening package consists of and will look like for your clients. If they struggle for whatever reason, it just encourage them to give us a call. And oftentimes we're able to walk them through it. If there is a technical issue, we will help them, or, you know, suggest that they call the 800 number to work through the technical issue, but they can always call our office and we'll figure it out, you know, help them get it figured out. Okay. The escrow flows. So one, we'll just go real quickly over this little wheel. Buyer selects a home, submits a contract with the loan. I'm sorry. 2, I can't read that. I'm sorry. It's kind of blurry on my end. I'm not sure what it looks like on your end. And number 2, PSA earnest money deposits are delivered, escrow reviews the PSA and conditions and requirements to close. Buyer and seller receive complete Starting Here package, which I just went over. Escrow establishes communication with the buyer lender, if any. If it's a cash transaction, you know, we will just fast forward through some of these items and get to, you know, with if the prelim is clean, it's a pretty simple process. Escrow orders and reviews the preliminary title report. Now, if you are part of a brokerage that likes to order or pre-open their escrows, just take note that in order to pre-open, you have to have a listing agreement signed already. We won't pre-open something if you want to see what's on the property before you go meet with the seller. That's not ideal. So in order to pre-open something, you'd have to have a listing agreement signed already. Escrow delivers preliminary title report to all parties. Depending on who you work with here at Chicago Title, there's very few of us, you get the prelim when we get the prelim. So oftentimes you'll have an opportunity where you don't have to wait to get that preliminary title report before the escrow officer sends it to you. And then 8 is very small, but I'm going to try really, really hard.
Anna, I can read that one. Escrow reviews liens on the title report, including ownership, loans to be paid out of it, property taxes, liens again, and utilizes or utilities if requested. So it's basically just, that's when we read the prelim after everybody gets it.
And I'm glad you read that, because I do want to point something out. We do not deal with utilities unless they're of record. We can prorate, you know, propane if you give us the information, but if they're not of record, we do not deal with them at all. And I mean, because there's no way for us to know about them and to prorate them and to address them accordingly. But again, if you give us escrow acts upon instruction. If you give us an instruction, a written instruction, we're happy to implement it into the escrow and process it accordingly. The next, number 9, is escrow confirms the closing date and prepares documents after loan documents arrive from lender, if any. As far as the close of escrow date, I do want to rewind a little bit. Everybody's perception is different. And so when you have a 30-day escrow and the close of escrow is to be 30 days after the day or from the day of acceptance, you know, sometimes there's holidays, sometimes there's not. It's best that you do confirm with your escrow company, everybody on the buyer side and the seller side, that they confirm what that close of escrow date is to be. Because if something gets sticky or the escrow gets a little rocky, then that could be another item, you know, that could be disagreed upon. And so it's best that you clearly state that at the beginning of what the close of escrow date is understood to be by all parties. Escrow schedule signing appointments for buyer and seller. Loan docs are returned to the lender for review and approval. Buyer deposits required funds to close with escrow. That's typically with a wire. Sometimes they do come in as a cashier's check. Should they come in a cashier's check, we're unable to act upon those funds until the following day because they have to be banked. Lender approves the signed loan docs to record and sends funds into escrow. And then documents are recorded in the county records office and escrow is closed. And then the last, escrow disperses funds, including seller's proceeds, broker commissions, and loans to be paid off, and any other required invoices. And then buyer receives keys from the real estate agent and broker. Real estate agent broker. So regarding being on record and closing, at that time, most units that they want to make sure that everything has been taken care of at that time. So once we're on, we audit our file all the way up to closing, but when it's our last opportunity to check it one more time. So we balance it out, and we want to make sure that everything is correct. So once we're on record, there is a little bit of a process to close the file out to make sure that we have everything that was addressed on the contract, any invoices, any updates, any addendums that had come in after the fact, that we didn't miss anything. So it does take a little bit. It's not, doesn't take forever, but it does take a little time to go through. And I mean, if anybody's like me, I like to focus on things, but escrow and real estate and just industry people are constantly, there's a constant interruptions. So I like to take the time to make sure that everything is correct. So once we're on record, we're not in a position just to hit enter and checks just get cut. Okay, so there is just a little bit of process. And then depending on what time of the day, I do have times where sellers they get a little bit upset because we get recording confirmation at 3 o'clock and they want to pick up, or they want that, they don't understand that, you know, their wire is not going to get to them until the following day. So it's best that you have conversations with your clients saying, you know, depending on the time that we actually go on record, will determine when you actually receive your funds. I've had somebody that was really upset with me that they chose to pick up a check, and I let the agents know we're on record. The seller was literally in my office 15 minutes after my email that had gone out because he wanted his check. And he was upset because I had to, he had to wait a little bit because I wasn't going to be able to cut a check on an unbalanced file. So it's just make sure you communicate to your clients that it does take a little bit of time. We're not going to take forever, but just, we don't want them to pick something up and I have to call them and say, you need to bring some of that back. If that makes any sense. So
Anna, we had a question. Does the buyer's agent or the buyer have the right to see all sides of the closing statement? Or are they only entitled to see their side?
they're only entitled to see their side. The buyer can only see the buyer's side and the seller can only see the seller's side. In regards to a master closing statement where both sides are reflected, those typically are given to the real estate agents because it's a requirement for their broker package. And that's not done until after closing, of course, or at closing, I'm sorry.
All right.
Okay. The preliminary title report, read the prelim when it comes in. It's not your job to know everything on the prelim, but it's best that you kind of understand, of course, what a prelim looks like, but some of the items that are on there, the most general items. So when you see something that's not a general item, it's going to cause you to have some questions, or it's going to, you know, it's going to make you say, ooh, I've never seen that before. And then you just, at that time, pick up the phone, send an email and say, hey, what is item number 8, whatever the case may be. But it is our job to address the prelim and all the items that are on the prelim, whether they stay or they are to be removed and taken care of through escrow. But we ask you as an agent, a loan officer, whatever the case may be, to understand what a prelim is and what typically is reflected on a prelim. So the big 3 key items to look for on your prelim is number 1, liens. Any other, are there any liens that are attached to the property, especially above and beyond of what your seller may have disclosed to you? If they said that they only have 1 mortgage, no solar, and then all of a sudden you get a prelim that has 3 mortgages and solar, or whatever, you know, a first and a second and some judgments, or whatever the case may be. Second is restrictions. Any kind of, believe it or not, there's some HOA, homeowners associations out there in our county that are not gated, and you would never guess that they belong to an HOA. So also, if there's CC&Rs on the property that say your client is buying this property for a specific reason, and those CC&Rs state that they are unable to perform that reason for whatever that reason may be. So you need to understand that as well. And then up to date preliminary title report, is the prelim up to date? Should the report be more than a few weeks old? usually if you have a prelim within 30 days, you're good. Anything past that, you're gonna want to ask for an updated prelim, because things get recorded day in, day out, Monday through Friday, all day long. And if you find yourself your clients in a particular situation where there might be something filed and you're racing to the finish line, it's best that you ask for an updated prelim. Okay. Additional items to review. Confirm the seller's name as well as the property in question matches on the preliminary report, and then the purchase and sale agreement. So say you go to your listing appointment, you get it signed, yay, so exciting, but you only meet with a Mr. Seller, and you're told that there's no Mrs. Seller, that Mr. Seller is unmarried or single, and then all of a sudden you get a preliminary title report and you see there's a Mr. Seller and a Mrs. Seller, or a Mr. Seller and a brother seller. And so that's where you have to question what your situation is who you have to I'm sorry, I apologize. See, escrow doesn't stop. I've been asking, I have asked for probate documents, and unfortunately for you guys, they brought them, and they don't want to let them leave before I look over the probate documents. So I'm sorry, that's why I was paused a little bit, because escrow doesn't stop. And just like all of you guys, you're gonna have let me take a real quick look. You're gonna have an escrow that is waiting for something. Yes, this is what I need. Thank you. Yeah, I need to keep the original. I need to record. So I'm sorry, but this is how we do it at Chicago Title. Things come flying left and right. Anyhow, that's a whole nother class, probate, by the way. And that'd probably be an interesting class for everybody to attend. So my thoughts back to here. Yes. So if you have somebody else additionally on the preliminary title report, you need to ask questions. We are going to ask questions. For instance, I had a refinance yesterday come in with loan documents, and I was never told that the two people on my prelim, that one of them was deceased. I get a prelim in, and one of my buyers is now married and is adding the husband, but then I asked the question, who is this second individual on the prelim? Come to find out, she passed away in 2011. And so it was an easy fix, but it caused a lot of questions because we were showing two different people on title. Loan docs came in. One person had the same first name, but of course got married, and I had a completely different person. So that's a very good example of always check your vesting. Reviewing easements, covenants, and restrictions reporting against the property. It's best that you understand what your client wants to do with the property, because, for instance, if your client fell in love with this property, but it doesn't have a pool, and that was one of their items on their wish list, but they were so in love with the property that they can deal with the fact that they didn't have a pool, and they'll put one in later on. Well, we had a scenario where this exact thing happened, and the buyer bought the property, and the prelim had easements on there, and they were very specific, but they didn't understand what those easements meant because they didn't read them. But one of them was a PG&E easement where there was a gas line running through the backyard, and there was a restriction that you are unable to dig because you can't. You're going to break through the gas line. It's going to be a disaster. So unfortunately, those buyers could not build a pool, and they bought a house that they were in love with, and So that's just one of the things that you need to be aware of. Another easement, if it's a rural area and it's out in the country and you're going down this dirt road to get to it and you don't think anything of it, but all of a sudden there is no right of access to that piece of property. And just for years and years and years, the neighbor was just so kind to let them use their dirt road that's actually their property to get access that out. So that is called a landlocked property. So just weird things that could happen. Just kind of be aware of your easements and your restrictions, and then review the HOA package. One little horror, just one little example. One little example is that if parking, maybe there's restricted parking on an HOA and your buyer has 4 cars and the house only has a 2-car garage and your buyer parks 2 cars on the driveway. Well, there's some HOAs that don't allow parking on the driveway overnight. So just review that HOA package to understand what the buyer is getting themselves into and that they're fully aware of what happens after we close. Okay.
Quick question on the HOA package, does it work just for the escrow, or if that escrow cancels and a new buyer is brought in, does anything have to be reordered, and how is that handled?
A package doesn't have to be reordered, but we can reach out to the HOA company and have it updated. There are HOA companies that won't update them and require the seller to pay the fee all over again just to get the exact same HOA. The reason why you would need that HOA package to be updated is because typically you're not going to get in and out of an escrow less than 30 days. Things happen during an HOA in 30 days. A meeting could have happened. They could have, approved a new assessment in that meeting. We need to still make sure that there is no litigation, or we need to make sure that the seller is still currently on time. So yes, we can use a good portion of that HOA package, but it still would have to either, i.e., be reordered or updated, depending on who the HOA company is.
Okay.
Identifying red flags in escrow. Early detection of problems that could cause delay of closing is vital. Here are some of the common red flag situations that must be brought to resolution before your transaction can close. A lot of these happen all day, every day, day in and day out. And some of these could be prevented. And I think you probably think this whole hour is a commercial about pre-opening escrows. I just want you to know it's just an important thing. It's not a commercial to pre-open, but it's just an important thing because a lot of these things can be taken care of if you pre-open because it can get addressed ahead of time. So bankruptcies, state warrants, state tax liens, federal tax liens, child and spousal support, mechanic liens, encroachments and off-record easements, family trusts, foreclosures, les pendants, property in estate or probate, property over encumbered, improper execution of documents, basically fraud, if we can figure that out, improper jurats, notary seals, recent construction, solar panels, transfer of loans involving corporations or partnerships, and pending lawsuits. So these are the things that come up on a preliminary title report that we have to deal with, we have to address before we can even move forward on any kind of closing. One thing on here, you actually won't, and the reason why I think it's best that I bring it up right now, because we just recently had a tax sale in Madera County. You won't actually get a prelim if a property is acquired via tax sale. But if and when we get through the tax title process and get that prelim, just know that, if a property's acquired by a tax sale, it's uninsurable without a tax title certificate process. And even at that point, when we get a prelim, some of these things can still be on a prelim and we still have to address them. So if you are going to be maybe listing a property in the next couple of months and your seller says, I acquired this through a tax sale, call me right away, because you're not going to be able to market it normally and in a timely process that you feel like you can. It goes in, there's a lot of details, and it's too much for me to go over this in this class, but I just needed, it was important because that just happened yesterday, okay, or day before yesterday. So anyhow, but wait, there's more. Paid unreleased loans for individuals, especially if they cannot be found. So old deeds of trust, private or old deeds of trust that were private beneficiaries, if they're on title and your client was like, oh, that was paid off a long time ago, or yeah, I paid that off, but I don't know where they're at, whether if it's a private beneficiary, or yeah, I paid it off, and that institutional lender is no longer in existence, there's a process that has to be taken. We either have to try to find the heirs of a private beneficiary, or try to find the institutional lender that took over that portfolio. If we're unable to do either one of them, we have to do a loss note bond. And that's typically that we have to outsource that to another insurance company. It's not a title insurance company, an insurance company, and they bond over it. And that typically takes anywhere between 30 to 45 days on top of your normal escrow process. And a loss note bond typically can cost anywhere between 1.5% to 2.5% of the face value of the old loan on title. Okay. So if it's 90,000, it's going to typically cost 1.5% to 2.5% of 90,000, and another 30 to 45 days on top of your escrow process. Housing code violations, basically abatements. If the city has placed a lien for, you know, a fire hazard, if they had to go up and board up the house, or high weeds, or whatever the case may be, a nuisance, any kind of nuisance that the city felt that property had, they will slap a lien on title. Judgments against seller or buyer. I do want to make a mention. Okay, I'll go over seller in just a second. Buyer, the only thing that we're going to deal with are federal tax liens and bankruptcies on the buyers. We don't run buyers anymore, but if we do come across that it's the buyer's name, you know, triggered something, we only deal with bankruptcies and federal tax liens. As for the seller, if there's judgments, we will reach out to you and the seller first and foremost, and if there's a judgment on title that they were not aware of, we won't automatically order it. We will advise you and the seller, this is what's on title. Would you like us to order the payoff? And the reason why is we don't want to take away the opportunity for the seller to negotiate a lower payout. We want to give them that opportunity. Now, having said that, if they choose to negotiate a lower payout, they have to be in communication with us quite a bit, so we know when we have to reach out to that creditor to request our demand. Because even though they're negotiating and they go into agreement for a lower payout, we cannot take something from the seller as our payoff statement. Once that's been an agreement has been signed between the seller and the creditor, at that point, then we start the process of reaching out to that creditor and ordering our payoff, our demand, and then they are bound to give us that amount that they agreed with the seller. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a side note scenario. Seller not vested in title. I've had that too just recently in the last 30 days where we got into contract and the seller that signed the contract was not really on title. They, it could be various things. It could be a POA, or they could have been a successor trustee, but then, the proper paperwork has not been filed to identify them as a trustee, a successor trustee, or the power of attorney. So we just have to, it's just one more thing to ask questions about. Last minute change in buyers. Oh, good Lord. Yes, please. If there's anything, well, there's lots of things you need to remember in this class, but just another thing for you to remember. You as a buyer's agent will work closely with the lender and try to make sure that the lender is going good. If there's a wrench thrown in it and you have to add a buyer, when that happens, let escrow know, because we have to run that buyer's name. We have to understand we cannot get loan documents with this buyer that we knew nothing about, because there's things that have to be done to get that buyer into our system and part of the transaction on the title and escrow side. So if there's a change in adding a buyer, taking away a buyer, swapping buyers, like, just let us know ahead of time, please. Also, if there's a change in sales price, a change in additional credit, or a change in the actual credit in lieu of the old credit. So if those are the type of things, it's great that you guys are working to make sure the transaction is going to close. Just let escrow know. In the seller signing, and of course, if you want to be present, please let your escrow unit know. The seller will be signing, I actually don't like that word final, but an estimated closing statement, because that word final like really sticks with people, because things can change still even after they sign. Closing disclosure, a grant deed, tax forms, disbursement instructions, car acceptance. So these are the most general things that they'll be signing in our transaction as a seller. And then in regards to a buyer, depending if it's a finance transaction or a cash transaction, they'll be signing an estimated settlement statement, rate and term with vesting confirmation. So the last time that they will confirm how they want to hold title, a preliminary change of ownership. This is a form that tells the tax assessor's office the scenario of what this property is going to be used for, and helps them assess a new value, if any. Qualified substitute. They have to substitute us as the escrow company to make sure that everything is being, as far as the FERPTA, the seller withholding, that all that stuff is being collected accordingly. And then it becomes our fiduciary duty to report accordingly to the state of California. An info sheet. So if there's any additional information that they hadn't given to us in our portal, this will give them an opportunity to add if they decided that they want to use a PO box instead of the property address as a mailing address. This is when they would have the opportunity to do so. Loan docs if it's being financed, spousal deed if any, if only one spouse is taking title due to any kind of financing purposes or whatever the case may be, or if it's just by choice. Disbursement instructions, anything, because we estimate everything that's on the closing statement to make sure that we have enough money to close the transaction. So any overages, how does the buyer want us to handle any overages, how they want it to be returned to them, and the car acceptance letter and any disclosures for natural hazard and preliminary title report approval. This is where they will approve the prelim and that they've read it and they've understood it. Okay. And then your closing date. There are numbers and factors that can affect your close of escrow date from signing to closing. So lots of things, as you can see, can happen, will happen from the time that you open escrow to the time that we are closing. So once loan docs are signed, they will go back to the lender for final review. Whether very rarely, I think it's like maybe 5% of the lenders out there now, if that high even, require the original loan docs to be returned to them before they would fund. But there are some lenders, I'm not going to tell you that there isn't. There are some lenders that require the original package to be returned to them before they fund. But at this point, we will scan them, upload them to the lender's portal, or send them to a closing email, and they will use this time to review it to make sure that everything has been addressed and signed accordingly. There may be last minute funding conditions to address. I do want to express that, if you know that your file is funding, please be available you know, for the first part of the first half of the day, because they're going to be, sometimes funders request things, items that we don't have as an escrow and title, because they're not escrow and title forms. They're not the normal car contract, any counters, any addendums. They're above and beyond car forms that we normally do not receive. So please be available, whether if you're not available, please have your TC available. So, because if we're under the crunch or under the, you know, a ticking time, and we need to reach out to either you or your TC, we're able to get those documents from you, from your office, so we can submit it to the funder so we can get that loan funded. And then all wires must go through the Federal Reserve. There's this, and I could tell you what it's called, but not right now because my head is full of all this information, but there is a department within the Federal Reserve that's called OFAC. And what they do is they watch every single file that goes through the Federal Reserve, I'm sorry, every single wire that goes through the Federal Reserve. And if there is a common name or a similar name that's on their watch list, they will pluck it out of that little pipeline and say, we're going to hold this money over here until we can make sure that the person involved in this transaction is not on our watch list, whether it be a terrorist watch list, money laundering watch list, any kind of criminal watch list, drug, like, just, you'd be amazed. So if the lender told you, we funded, and escrow is still saying, I haven't got the wire, I haven't got the wire, I haven't got the wire, there could be, it may be possible that OFAC plucked that wire out and said, hold on 1 minute. And it could take anywhere between 24 to 72 hours for OFAC to release that wire to us. Now, I've only had it go around 24 hours or less, but OFAC does send a disclosure to the bank saying we could hold this wire up to 72 hours. So just so you know that. And so it goes from the lender to the Federal Reserve to the escrow trust account, whatever bank that may be. And then the bank lets our accounting know, hey, you have a wire. So that's the kind of the process that it goes to. And then a final date down is done by a title department. So if you look at a preliminary title report and say today, okay, today is May 16th, and you get a prelim today, May 16th, but the date on it says May 1st. That date is our date down date. That date is telling you, like, we've checked public records and everything that is reflected on this preliminary title report is as of May 1st. So we close June 15th and our prelim is dated May 1st. We need to make sure nothing happened with this property from May 1st to June 1st, because we're about 2 weeks behind the plant date, which is normal. So that's what happens when we release a file to record it. The title does a date down and they just rerun the property really quick and the seller's name and the buyer's name to make sure nothing has happened in the last, for the sake of days, 30 days. Okay. Once that's done, all the documents must be reviewed and approved by the county recorder. And then once we get recording confirmation, we can share that we're on record, and then we start to work on dispersing the funds to all parties. An important reminder, we cannot overstate the importance of communicating through our secure channels. Start in here. Do not send sensitive information through email. Wire fraud is real. I've talked about it several times already in this last hour. If your buyer's funds are diverted due to fraud, they may never recover the money. 74% of home buyers incorrectly believe their title company or bank could recover funds that are wired to the wrong account. 52% of home buyers are completely unaware of wire fraud in the real estate. So just make sure you talk to your clients about these things. And 3.5 billion was attempted to be diverted and wired to criminally controlled accounts in 2019. It's only gone up since 2019. So be vigilant, please. Top tips for a smooth escrow: communicate any changes, dates, parties, etc. to your escrow officer ASAP. If your clients are heading out of town, out of state, or out of the country, please let us know. Death, solar, and power of attorney can complicate things. Let's chat. If you have any questions at this point, just reach out to us. Okay. Best way to reach you normally, let us know how we can reach you in an urgent situation, and review your client's estimated closing statements as soon as possible for any missing items or needed correction. So typically it's our practice. So once we schedule your client signing, we will send you the last known estimate. Take the time to review it to make sure something didn't happen and escrow doesn't know about it, or we're human, maybe we just missed it. And close. We can't wait to work with you. I don't know if there's any questions in the chat that I did not address, because I think you guys were good about stopping me. Do you know?
I think we're good. If at this point, want to thank everybody for coming. I know we went a couple minutes over, but it's a lot to cover, as you can tell. And this again was just a surface view. So we know there's particular quirks to almost every transaction. Work closely with your Chicago title sales team and escrow officer, and we'll get you precise information on whatever your particular situation is to the best of our ability. If you want to stay on the call for a minute and ask Anna another question, we'll open that up at this time. But to everyone else, thank you for joining us, and expect a copy of this recording later today.